moving on to a different topic, the LCIA recently revised its notes for arbitrators to include further guidance on the use of tribunal secretaries. And the guidance relates to appointment formalities, the selection of the tribunal secretary, their remuneration, and the tasks of such a secretary. The notes do not include an exhaustive list, rather provide a procedure that should lead to an informed discussion about, in particular, the tasks of a tribunal secretary. And to launch these changes, we have launched a roadshow. You were involved in a recent event we did in Paris, which was fun, amongst other things, where we ask 3 senior practitioners to act as arbitrators, counsel as advocates, and tribunal secretary to act the tribunal secretary, and then work our way through how procedure or case management conference would work, where the use of a tribunal secretary is discussed. What did you think about this format and using it as a platform for having more discussion about the use of a tribunal secretary?
I was smiling because it was actually really fun, as you said. I mean, having this role play with the tribunal and the counsel and the, future possible secretary to the tribunal was just such a playful way to focus on really, really important topics. And it's sort of, I had the impression it made everyone involved in the audience sort of think about all of these important questions that you don't necessarily would have thought about in the same way had you just had presentations. Which cases actually are good cases to appoint secretary to the tribunals? If they're appointed, what can they actually do? How much do you want to tell the parties? Can the parties actually say no to a secretary to the tribunal? Do they actually dare to at the beginning of the proceedings? And sort of psychologically, do they want to be a little bit difficult at this stage, or do they just say yes, yes, yes to everything that they're presented with from the tribunal at this stage? So I thought that was a really, really good way in sort of looking at important, difficult issues.
What struck me at this event and the others we have done is that it almost automatically also leads to a discussion of much more general and potentially more profound issues, such as how does a tribunal deal with certain decision-making methods or tools. So, for instance, what do you expect from the parties when it comes to providing summaries of facts, which may be culturally driven, but it doesn't necessarily have something to do with the use of a tribunal secretary. But when you have a discussion whether they can do something, if in the view of one of the arbitrators the solution is to have this done by the parties, and another arbitrator says, no, not at all, that's not how we would do it where I come from, you get actually quite it's almost providing you with a bit of insight in the internal decision-making process that you might not otherwise have. Did you think it was confrontational, and how would it relate to what you'd see in real life?
I think what is really important in this is that this discussion sort of brings out into the light something that maybe was a bit of a taboo until still fairly recently. So the emphasis that this revised notice puts on the communication between the tribunal and the parties, on the information provided, the fact that it's not only whether or not you want a secretary to the tribunal, but what are actually the tasks that the secretary to the tribunal will do. And there is no, conform practice in international arbitration right now. I know of a couple of well-known arbitrators. They rarely, if ever, use secretary to the tribunals. And I know of others who have a team of assistants that help them to run the case effectively. And I do generally think that there is not a right or wrong answer in that, provided, of course, that the decision-making power is strictly and very, very strictly within the hands of the tribunal. But I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all method.
And insofar as you use tribunal secretaries yourself or have seen them being used, do you see certain types of cases where you think it is more appropriate, desirable, or even necessary, and others where you say, well, that for me would be a counter-indication?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think for me, it depends on the case. I don't have a sort of model that I use for every single case, that I always systematically appoint a secretary, and I always systematically ask a secretary to do certain things. I've just finished an award in a case I'm chairing where I didn't have a secretary to the tribunal at all. There were several reasons for that. This is a fairly sensitive case. There's a state involved. I mean, it wasn't very document heavy. It was a big, important case for that country, but it wasn't very document heavy. I remember this is also an LCIA case, a couple of years ago, where these were two parallel proceedings, shareholder disputes, and in each case you had about 15 to 20 parties. Some of them were identical, some of them were not. You had claims and counterclaims and cross claims. So there I had a secretary to the tribunal, and luckily, I mean, just getting the parties' names and the
Yes.
parties' addresses correct, I was very, very grateful to have a second pair of eyes.